Thank you, Pablo. So now you guys know that if you have any preconception of a computer scientist not having fun, now you know the reality, right? What you can do. So I hope we're opening some eyes there. So now we have Daniel Rock. So he's a postdoctoral associate at the MIT Sloan and research at the MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy. So we saw SOAP, and now we see MIT Initiative on the Digital Economy, which is another very important initiative at MIT that I'll let Daniel explain what's going on there. But thanks for coming.
Thank you. Okay, it's a real hard act to follow there. Pretty stunning stuff. So this is joint work with my PhD advisor, Eric Brynjolfsson, who heads up the initiative on the digital economy. Also Tom Mitchell at CMU, and then Morgan Frank here at the Media Lab, as well as his doctoral advisor, Iyad Rawan, who's now at Max Planck. So the question that Tech Review likes to put in everyone's mind is how soon will it be that the robots take all of our jobs? I'm here to assure you that that's not going to happen. To start things off, we wanted to know the answer, though. What is it that machine learning can actually do in the economy? So it helps to keep in mind that we don't have artificial general intelligence. There are no machine gods out there that can do everything humans can do but better. But there are specific things that ML can do better than humans and in many ways augment us. So what is it that we can actually do? Well, to do that, we need to develop a new technique. So we built a 21-question rubric that you can use to score any of the activities that are done in the, we use the US economy as a base, but as I'll show you, we expand that beyond the US. So we score each one of these tasks according to 21 questions, and that gives us a sense over the 2,000 activities, which map into about 20,000 tasks, and the 950 or so occupations in the BLS's taxonomy. We can get a good sense of where machine learning is going to affect the labor market. So some preliminary results here. ML is different than previous waves of automation. It does different stuff. I'll get into that. Low-wage jobs are more exposed than high-wage jobs to some kind of impact, but there's no job that can be fully automated by machine learning. Everything is going to transform, but not necessarily get replaced. That said, elevator operators have been replaced over the last 70 years or so, so maybe with some other technologies, full automation is possible. Nevertheless, we see tons of heterogeneity across different occupations, and that means that this redesign of jobs and business processes is where most of the action is going to be. So let me get into some of that. What is it that machines can actually do now that we have machine learning, but we didn't before? So we're codifying a lot more knowledge now. There's a lot more data to go in. That's sort of the mantra when it comes to automating things. Codify stuff, digitize it, and replicate it at scale. The economics here then are high fixed costs, low marginal costs. And that's different than your standard high marginal cost, not necessarily high fixed cost kind of setup. So machine learning is what economists will call a general purpose technology. That is, it's pervasive. It's in a lot of different sectors at once. It gets better over time, basically the definition of machine learning. And then it generates complementary innovations, and that takes a lot of time. That can take decades. So nevertheless, everyone seems to be worried about it. By the way, when I'm going to talk about AI here, I'm talking about machine learning, which is part of artificial intelligence, not all of it. And then within machine learning, it's what deep learning is doing most recently. That's coolest. So what is it that machine learning is new to do? Well, there's this idea of Polanyi's paradox. That is, we know more than we can tell. All right. So if I asked you to tell me how to bake a cookie, you could give me the ingredients. You could tell me the explicit steps. I follow one to the other, and I get a cookie. But if I asked you to tell me how you can recognize your mother, that's a little bit more of a tall order, right? That new setup where I can give you inputs and outputs, and the machine automatically learns the map between the two, solving Polanyi's paradox for computation, that's what's new about deep learning, and that's what's exciting from an economic perspective, at least in the short run. So this deals with what computer scientists will call supervised learning for the most part. There are other paradigms that I won't get into here, but tons of applications here. I'm still waiting for traffic to be improved with these kinds of things. I've seen that paper. It'd be really helpful in Boston, but things like high-frequency trading, even drug discovery, all getting turbocharged by supervised learning. So now let's see what the results are. What are we actually doing here, and how do we figure this out? So we trust our colleague Tom here, who's computer scientist to help generate a good context for doing these rubrics. I'm going to skip through here yet because we'll get into some of the results later. But here's some of the activities in ONET. Inspecting finished products to locate flaws, following safety procedures, processing billing information. This was kind of creepy. They kind of knew we were going to analyze jobs using survey, observation, studies. It describes pretty well what people do in their occupations, okay? So we asked these questions about all of these different activities. Does the task require complex reasoning? Is there data involved with the task? How important are each one of these tasks to each one of these jobs? And what we get at an aggregate level for each occupation, weighting each task by its importance, is roughly how exposed to machine learning each one of these jobs are. Okay, so we can aggregate from the task to the job, and then from the job to firms, industries, regions, countries, et cetera. So here, I'll skip through some of these rubric questions. I usually have a little bit more time to go through them. But for this one, let's look at radiologists, because this is the one, Jeff Hinton famously said we should stop training radiologists right now. He's since recanted that. But one of the 27 things that they do is interpreting images using computer-aided detection and diagnosis systems. There are 26 other things that they do, not all of which are highly exposed to machine learning, or as we call it, SML, suitable for machine learning. Okay, so we've got these. Let's walk through one of these evaluations. Our first question, the information needed for the task is machine readable. Okay, yeah, it is. The output is error tolerant. That's absolutely not the case. You can't screw this one up. You need to explain what you're deciding when you're talking to patients with this stuff. And then, of course, it does involve working with image data. So overall, we get a task SML of 3, which is roughly the 58th percentile. All right? So even the things that seem obviously exposed to machine learning, maybe more, maybe not so much. All right, so here's the kind of hit list, who's in trouble and who's safe, right? Switchboard operators, I was a little surprised that's still a job. They're the most exposed. You have a lot of clerical work, information processing, routine information processing. On the other hand, maybe I should rethink this, but music composers and arrangers, not so much exposed to machine learning. I don't think they're getting automated anytime soon, though it seems like they're a good case for augmentation. Psychologists, product safety engineers, lawyers always find a way. I was happy to find that economists also are pretty low on the list. Okay, so you can vary this threshold, though, for what you consider exposed to machine learning. And roughly, when we order these things, we get stuff that makes sense. So, if you said only the 100th percentile, only the most exposed stuff is suitable for machine learning, you'd get balancing receipts, and that's pretty much it. But as you start to scale back to roughly the 75th percentile, you start to see things that, like analyzing web traffic or data, that sort of where machine learning is right now. Whereas welding metal, you need something else besides machine learning to do it. Okay, maybe in conjunction with robotics technology, but you can't do that there. So, when you look by industry, this is non-farm employment, so forgive the omission of some of the agriculture stuff, but there's a ton of opportunity in healthcare and social assistance, a ton of opportunity in professional and scientific services, finance, you see that already, accommodation, et cetera. Okay, so here's an indication that this hasn't happened yet, though, and we hear a lot of talk about the giant impact of ML. One of the ways we know it hasn't happened yet is there's almost no correlation between the total wage bill, that is what's spent on these occupations in the economy, and their exposure to machine learning. And had we already seen a change, you'd start in that top right, because that's, if you're a new entrepreneur, say, hey, well, I can help retail salespeople get automated, or I can help them get augmented. That's where the money is. So you'd start there and you'd work your way down and you'd start to see a correlation, but we don't see that. So that indicates there's some evidence that most of what's to come, is still from machine learning is in the future. Okay, so here's some of the different categories. We can split it by high, middle, and low wage, low SML, high SML. Within SML, we have 2 more categories that we call observability, and this is where you see a lot of our colleagues finding the opposite that we find, that they find high correlation between wages and exposure to machine learning. And the reason we think that might be the case is because they're finding a lot of data-intensive jobs. So if I can see the inputs and the outputs and I can build a system that can be controlled, there's a lot of jobs that use that, things like actuaries or chemists, where they're good candidates for augmentation. Okay. People I'd be worried about are like cashiers, telemarketers, customer service reps, that kind of thing. All right. So here's another set of charts that kind of show the clustering of what machine learning can do. In purple, you have the more exposed occupations. Those tend to be clerical jobs, factory sequence processing kind of things. Therapists and clergy, not so exposed, right? So they get grouped. These are all the jobs grouped by the tasks that they have in common. Okay, so meanwhile, by region in the US, this is where we see a lot of reorganizable employment. That is, if more than 20% of your job is in the 75th percentile or higher, this is where we see opportunity to change what people are doing and unlock some of the value. We can look at where image data is. These are sub-items in our rubric. So image data tends to be concentrated in cities. Surprise, that's the case for text data. It's the case for speech data as well, and other structured data, though the exposure to ML is sometimes not oriented in cities, but rather the opposite, more in small areas. So I'm excited to announce as well that we are starting the World SML project and launching this soon. So this is where we are taking the mappings from occupations to tasks in the US, but then using global estimates of different types of workforces in different countries and figuring out their exposure. So here's the world map on 6 different categories in addition to total SML. We've got chatbots, structured data, text data, speech data, and prediction. And we can rank countries based on how exposed they are to SML. So this is thanks to the tireless work of our postdoc, Sarah Banna. She's doing an awesome job with this. Here's Brazil. So payroll clerks, pretty highly exposed and an important job category in Brazil. There's some mixture of different tasks that mean that shop supervisors might be exposed as well. Here's Peru. The occupational structure of Peru is a little bit different. There's a lot of drivers and mobile plant operators who are exposed, but then also numerical clerks and material recording clerks. So a lot of this clerical work, every country is a little bit different in terms of its labor mix, and this is going to affect how much of an opportunity there is to use ML for those applications. So for those of you who are in the finance industry, I want to scare you a little bit, because the industry composition here matters a lot too. Finance is basically 4 jobs, okay? There's certainly an IT function, but there's managers, there's analysts, and then there's a back office, okay? That's not a very sophisticated structure compared to some other industries. So if you're gonna face a competitor who's decided to automate their entire back office or completely change their workflow, it might require a lot of investment all at once, right? So meanwhile, okay, so this is a little harder to read, but the big purple group there, that's your clerical jobs. Meanwhile, market insights, well, we're calling market insights, but it's a mixture of professional and scientific services and other types of more complicated work. This is a really complicated industry. There's lots of different things going on there. There's lots of opportunity to reorganize, but it's not as clear that there's a simple business model from the labor structure. Okay, so a little bit more resiliency there, potentially. We can also rank firms by the AI skills that they're using in addition to their AI exposure. That's on the x-axis here. We have an AI skills index from our partners at LinkedIn. That's where MasterCard happens to be located. And you can kind of see it's not necessarily, exposure to machine learning isn't necessarily correlated with firm size. Okay, so lots of different ways to cut it. I'll skip over this, but basically, for those of you who are familiar with the Otter and Acemoglu routineness scores, this is different. That explains about a quarter of the variation that we have in our SML scores, but the rest is new from machine learning. Okay, so just to recap, when you do this reorganization, it brings up the importance of at least 3 new types of work. One is measuring performance for workers. If you can measure better, then you can sometimes build machine learning systems that will be value creating, okay? So there's investment there that has to happen. There's redesign of the workflows. You don't want to take the ML technology and just slot it into what you're already doing for marginal gains. In the long run, we're going to have to see transformative processes. And then, of course, the thing that's always in short supply, innovating by asking better questions. The last presentation, all the presentations that I've seen today have been good examples of that. So yeah, the key takeaways, we shouldn't be worried about machine learning taking away all of our jobs, but we should think carefully about all the friction that it might create to adjust to a new model that adequately uses this technology and gets the most out of what this technology can do. That is to say, we have a lot of work ahead of us, and the future of work is going to be a ton more work, but that's an exciting thing. And those benefits and costs are going to be unevenly distributed, so we should keep that in mind. Okay, thanks very much. Just a last note on the initiative on the digital economy. We're always looking for partners to do interesting studies and see how this kind of technology is transforming organizations or businesses. So thanks very much. I'll skip through this bit here.